Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our UNLV Visitors Edition. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. With us today is UNLV radio color analyst and former Runnin' Rebel quarterback Caleb Herring. UNLV got the season started on Saturday at home with a blowout win over Bryant University. The Rebels are usually your typical Mountain West team. Throw the ball most of the time and sprinkle in some run to keep the defenses honest. This might not be your typical Mountain West team, at least this year. They are led by a young quarterback and group of receivers, and are expected to struggle. They will probably lean on the running game early, if not most of the year. There are a lot of new faces on this team we'll see on Saturday, and a new head coach and staff on the sidelines. Barry Odom takes over as head man after spending the last 3 years as defensive coordinator at Arkansas. At his Monday presser, Coach was asked for his thoughts on the Michigan offense he'll see on Saturday.
They're explosive on offense. They've got the skill and the scheme to stress you in every area: run game, pass game, play action, move in the pocket, quarterback, run game. They do it all, and they do it at a very, very high level. They've obviously recruited really well. They've got great coaches and great players, and their scheme is tough. So we've got to do a tremendous job on getting our guys in position, understanding that there's going to be times that we make a call that, they counter that and have a good call as well. We've got to, again, the goal doesn't change on trying to eliminate explosive plays. We've got to be good against the run. We can't allow there to be chunk yardage in the run game and through the air. Their quarterback is a special player, and so we've got to do a great job in our coverage. We've got to have tremendous eye discipline. We've got to understand and be able to change zone and match up man concepts, and then also we've got to be in a position that we can load the box to try to stop the run. If they've got a weakness, I haven't found it yet. So they're really solid and a great team.
Coach Odom also talked about how his team will prepare for the big house environment.
Yeah, I think just like we'll treat it home or away, other than the communication piece for our offense and our punt team, that's got to be really, and we'll have some of that tomorrow in practice with noise periods. Just you think about third downs and the way you've got to communicate in that environment, how important that is. So we'll spend some extra time on that. Other than that, we'll have a normal, really good physical Tuesday practice and Wednesday practice. Thursday we'll have our kicking script and go through situational ball. And then I want to get there to the hotel the same time on Friday that we would if it was a home game. And then we lock into our normal Friday night routine. So obviously excited to play at a historical venue in Ann Arbor, and know our kids will be excited to go on the road for the first time this year.
My guest today says UNLV is well aware that they are huge underdogs on Saturday. He said this is still a great opportunity for this young team and the future direction of Rebel football. Joining us next is radio color analyst and former UNLV quarterback Caleb Herring, so don't go away. Joining us on the visitors segment of our show this week is UNLV color analyst Caleb Herring. Caleb, great to have you with us.
Great to be here. I'm excited for the week. Prepping for Michigan is always a fun thing.
Well, yeah, and looking at your background, you played quarterback at UNLV from 2010 to 2013, I think it was. Had a solid career, especially your senior year when I was looking at some of your career highlights. One of your biggest nights, if not your biggest, was in a big comeback win over one of our in-state schools, Central Michigan.
That's right. There is a connection there. Central Michigan was probably one of my more memorable games of my career in UNLV history, actually. So definitely some crossover there if you want to count the in-state school as being something to prepare for. But it was a fun time. It was great to be able to contribute to the university and have some great memories in that senior year, and now to be still a part of the program in the new capacity here where I'm around football still. Of course, that's every former player's dream, right, is to have access to the team still. So I'm definitely excited about that opportunity.
Great honor to be back up in the booth with Russ calling the play-by-play for your alma mater. And this weekend, of course, or last weekend, I should say, UNLV got the season started off in the victory column. But before we talk about that game, let's talk about Coach Barry Odom. It's his first year at the helm. What do you think of him so far?
Well, I like what I see. I mean, I liked what I saw when, the hire was announced, and since his touchdown in Las Vegas, I think he's had the right demeanor and the right approach to this community and how unique it is in terms of its sports market. With UNLV kind of being the only sport for so long, and now all of a sudden the community's budded into somewhat of a sports town in every facet. But he's definitely come in with an understanding of embracing the community and really reaching out to myself and other alumni who are in the community and support the program. And I think the city's embraced him in that regard as well. He's also a football guy through and through. And I think the smallest details about the way he presents himself and the way he is, how methodic he is about practices and things like that. You get the real sense that he's about football, even from his family and the way that they are so supportive of his efforts and his endeavors. Every public engagement that I've seen in that, his family's right there with him, and they're all 100% 10 toes down with him. So the things that he's brought, the attitude, the demeanor, the mentality that he's brought, not only in the community, but between the lines, the players have received it. And I think that's one of the most important things about a coach is, you can know all the football you want to know, but how much can you reach the players and get them to be engaged in what you're coaching? And I think from what I've seen, he's definitely done that. So far, success on all fronts, and there's still many tests to overcome as the season progresses in his first year, but he's definitely on the right track to doing the right thing for this program.
Well, he certainly got started off on the right foot on Saturday. UNLV beat Bryant University to open the season at home in Allegiant Stadium after, I think, a rain delay. The monsoons out there, which is always interesting in a dome stadium. But 44-14 win, which was the largest margin of victory in a first game by a Rebel head coach, I think, since Ron Meyer, who won his initial game way back in 1973. So all in all, that's the kind of start you want, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's quite the accomplishment, honestly. I mean, there's so much that goes into week one preparation, let alone being the first year and having so much transition in today's football. I think it's very different even than back in the day when you take over a program, because the roster turnover is so much more than it used to be with the transfer portal and things like that. So there's so much adjusting that you have to do on the fly in an off season, reestablishing a program, inserting new or implementing a staff, and things like that that just make it chaotic. And to finally be able to put it on the field and come away with a win is definitely a victory, a small victory. But to kick off the season in that fashion was big, not just for Coach Odom, but for the guys as well. The guys that stayed in the program and stuck with it through the coaching transition. And then also the guys that are new to the program and came in with expectations to contribute and make an impact and have some success. And they definitely enjoyed that in week one. And as an offensive guy, I understand it's hard no matter who the opponent is to put up 40 points, whether you're heavily favored or not. 40 points in any performance is tough. And UNLV was able to do that offensively in their first game as a unit under Coach Odom. And I'm sure that's exciting. And he made a joke in the post game presser that somebody lied to him and said it never rains in Las Vegas. and here it is, week one, and it's a monsoon outside, the biggest rain in the valley in the last 10 years. So there you go. Welcome to Las Vegas.
Yeah. Well, Caleb, let's talk about this Rebel offense and some of the key players we'll be seeing on Saturday against Michigan. I mean, offensive coordinator Brennan Marion does have talent to work with there, and that always starts with your quarterback. And Doug Brumfeld, in this case, he was 11 of 18 on Saturday for 86 yards passing, no TD throws, and he had one pick. Talk about him and what he brings to this Rebel offense.
Well, I think he's evolved as he's been with the program now for a few years, and that maturity shows in the way he leads the team and the way the guys look up to him to make plays and to be an efficient passer. And I think last game, you saw that. You can affect the game in a variety of different ways. The passing game maybe not as efficient or as explosive as he'd like it to be, but he's definitely stepped into a role as a leader. And like you mentioned, every team starts with a quarterback, and that's just the nature of the business these days. And this is the first time in his career that he's entered a season as the undisputed starting quarterback. He hasn't been involved in a quarterback competition this offseason, which is new to him and frankly new to the program. There's been a number of seasons. I can't even count back how many times that the quarterback position was a controversy during the offseason. But this year for Doug, he stepped into his leadership role and he's owned it, and he's demanding perfection from himself. And he's probably his biggest critic at this point. And Coach Odom and the staff are trying to make him understand his role and his function, and how he grades out game to game is going to change. But his impact and his presence is necessary, and I think his availability is paramount to the success. As with any team, the quarterback is the most important position in all of sports, if you ask me. And having the right guy behind center is definitely important. And I think Doug is that guy for UNLV.
Let's talk about that receiving core he has to look at. Not led by, but one of the familiar names to Michigan fans is Ricky White, who transferred there from Michigan State. And, of course, we remember his big day against us in the 2020 COVID season. But you've got Jacob DeJesus, who has some wheels. And then you have Seneca McKee, also very capable receiver. So your thoughts on that piece of the offense?
I think Ricky White, obviously, for Michigan fans, will be one name they recognize and maybe a key for the defense, obviously not wanting him to repeat his last performance at the Big House. But he's one of those players that's dynamic, and I think that's probably what I'd say about the receiving core as a whole. Every name that you mentioned is a capable playmaker. And I think that was the intent of Coach Marion's offensive recruiting, is to make sure that guys in this system, everybody's capable of taking it the distance. And I think at different times in the opener, every one of those names that you mentioned and everybody else in the receiving core showed glimpses of what they're capable of doing. And I think that's an exciting thing as an offensive player, to have weapons at your disposal and to kind of be able to have a variety. Variety is the spice of life, so they say. And I think in the receiving group, that's probably one of the groups that's the example, is that anybody can hurt you. Anybody can be a playmaker at any given time. And sometimes that makes it difficult for teams to prepare for. But that, I think, is the goal for UNLV. And we'll see how much that plays out and how much that goal comes to fruition here throughout the season. And boy, it'd be a big thing if it helps out the game plan against the Wolverines.
Well, in the backfield, a lot of guys got carries that I saw. Vincent Davis had 79 yards and just 3 carries. Of course, first play from the line of scrimmage, he took that to the house. Jaden Thomas, 60 yards on 8 carries. 5 other backs also got carries in the game. Other than Vincent Davis, is the offense still in search of number 2 or a number 3 running back?
I think the beauty of it kind of echoes throughout the offense, we talked about the receiving group and variety, and it's the same thing in the running back room. And I think that's really a dynamic feature in this UNLV offense, this new look offense, is they really haven't specified who the guy is or who's in number 2 position. The depth chart is more of a living document, if you will, and it can change from week to week. And I think that, definitely has some certain advantages on a week-to-week basis as far as keeping your opponent guessing. But I think last year we saw a UNLV team that was very dominant to one running back. And that running back went for 1,000 yards in Aiden Robbins. But I think the new look Rebels have very intentionally made their offense more diverse and who can touch the ball, who's able to touch it, the rotations at the position. You usually think about running back, and traditionally the thought is you want to find an every down back, and that's what you're looking for in recruiting. But I think in this instance, UNLV has 5 or 6 capable running backs who, like you mentioned, all got opportunities to touch the ball in week 1. How much that is the case for the rest of the season is yet to be determined. But I think all of the names you mentioned, if you were to ask me during fall camp, of the 4 or 5 names that you said, who would come out on top? Who would be the number 1 guy? I would honestly not be able to answer the question. There's been so many reps during fall camp and such a speedy rotation at running back. I think the legs will be fresh, if nothing else. But just about everybody is capable of touching the ball. And they all do different things and bring different values to the table. But I think the overall goal was to make it running back by committee and be intentional about that.
Well, it worked on Saturday, 277 yards on the ground. From what I saw, and I got to watch the entire game on tape, there were a lot of big holes that these guys were running through. At least it looked like that to me. So you look at your offensive line when that happens, and I know there were only 2 returning starters on that unit. A lot of new faces, aren't there, Caleb?
That's right, there are. And there's, you mentioned some of the guys that have been around, like Amani Trigg Wright and Tiger Shanks. Those 2 have kind of been in the program for multiple years, and you would call them maybe the veterans on the group. But Coach Odom definitely made that a point of emphasis and trying to create depth on the offensive line and trying to make sure that guys were cross-trained as a term he used often throughout the offseason was to make sure he figured out exactly which 5 work together. And that involves switching and shuffling positions and, again, making the depth chart into more of a living document than a set-in-stone law about what the team would be. And it paid benefits. I think he shuffled some guys around on the offensive line and found the right mix and the right mesh of players. That, along with adding some transfer talent that was expected and did make an impact right away. Guys like Jack Haas at center who definitely made an indelible mark on the team and was a contributor all throughout the offseason. But he helped in anchoring the offensive line and being that constant voice, along with Doug Brumfield, and making sure they're headed in the right direction. But they gelled well. And I think Coach Odom struck the right match, at least for week 1. And we'll see, obviously the offensive line is one of those position groups that suffers injuries. It's almost an inevitability when you're talking about the offensive line. If somebody's going to make it all 12 games, that's a rarity these days. But we'll see if there's some Ironmen. But the depth, I think, was a point of emphasis in getting multiple guys and multiple lineups ready to play. Was something that Coach Odom was definitely emphasizing throughout the offseason.
Well, I know it's only 1 game, and you have a new coaching staff, so a new offense. But is the goal to be balanced on offense for this team, or will it be more run-oriented team, which is interesting in the pass-happy Mountain West? What do you think it's sort of leaning towards this year?
Well, if I had to guess, and this is just based on Coach Odom when he came in, I would have probably said before things got started that he would prefer to have a run-heavy team. Him being a defensive coach and having a defensive background, we know time of possession and controlling the clock are probably heavy on his to-do list for the entirety of the season. But then you think about things like the explosive offense he had when he was the head coach at Missouri and how dominant they had of a passing game. And you think, well, that might be the case as well. What kind of tools does he have in the tool shed to make that happen? But the overall feeling that I get from this team is that they're going to be willing and able to take advantage of whatever any defense gives them. And they're not going to have pride in the run game to say we're going to run it no matter what. They're not going to be so stubborn to throw it and try to light it up on the highlight reel with explosive plays. If they have the ability to, they will do whatever the defense allows them to. And I think that is probably one of the hallmarks and one of the goals, I think, of every offense is to be able to take what the defense gives them. And it's a simple term. It's terminology that's been used throughout college sports and in the NFL and football in general for decades. But I think truly when I watch this team, they have set themselves up to make explosive plays and be able to rely on a variety of different facets of their offense, whether it be the run game, which it was last week, or the explosion in the pass game, which they're very capable of doing there. It just really is a matter of feeling the game out. And offensive coordinator Brennan Mary and Coach Odom have had lengthy discussions about that and exactly what that looks like. And I think that's the goal. And that a balance, I guess, is what the result of that would be at the end of the season. But from week to week, it could change. Whatever the defense dictates is probably what they'll attack.
Well, let's talk about the defense for a minute or two, Caleb. Coach Odoms is a defensive guy, defensive coordinator at Arkansas. And I thought it was interesting he deployed a 3-2-6 base defense, which, as you probably know, we don't see much of in the Big Ten, probably not at all. But is he is that what he's trying to do? I know in the Mountain West it's a whole different ball game with everybody slinging the ball around. But what kind of defense is he starting with, at least this year?
Well, I think you could look at the structure of the defense, and I would say it'd be fair to say that the newness, I guess, or the rarity of this defensive structure being implemented elsewhere, even in the Mountain West, it's very rare to see such a structure. I think that would definitely play a part in it. But I think more importantly, there's a level of comfort that he and his staff have with calling and coaching through that system that allows them to kind of impart that. And I think also a lot of it had to do with the personnel coming in. And I think he married a system to the personnel the best he could. And in this case, it may have just been that it worked out the best to kind of do the things that he's always done as a defensive coordinator and implement some of those same principles. And whatever advantages that gives UNLV on Saturdays with the opponents, whether it's the Mountain West or the Big Ten and Michigan, whatever advantages that presents, I'm sure he'll be happy to take those along. But, there's probably some story that I'm not privy to about the origins of why he chooses the 3-3-5 or the 3-2-6 as his base structure. And that may go back to his playing time and whatever he was comfortable with back then. But it definitely is something that's new to UNLV. And I think that was one of the storylines of the offseason for Rebel fans, was trying to figure out the new structure. And in week one, I'm sure we didn't see all that it has to offer. I'm sure that there were some things left in the tank for as far as putting it on film and trying not to give away any details or tendencies in that regard. But it is definitely something to prepare for. And I can go back to my time as a player. One of the only defenses in the Mountain West that employed this was Rocky Long at San Diego State, who's now at New Mexico, who was at New Mexico, and he was a defense coordinator there. But it was one of those defenses that gave you nightmares because there's rules that it breaks, rules that in the traditional 4-3 or 4-2 you don't see. And there's so much variety to it, again, the spice of life. And I think that may be something that attracted him. But I'd have to pick Coach Odom's mind and have to kind of watch and learn exactly why he's implemented the system and see how much it benefits this Rebel team.
Well, on the defensive end, 6 starters returned from last year's team, which was ranked 9th in the conference in scoring defense. I know you picked up a couple of SEC recruits to shore up things, but talk about some of the key players that are leading the way on that side of the ball for the Rebels.
Well, I think there's been a lot of growth. Some guys that returned that have been with the program for the last couple of years prior to Coach Odom taking over, and guys in the secondary especially, which was traditionally, if I'm going back, for the last decade or so, the secondary was probably the weaker point, one of the weaker points of the defensive unit. And that is kind of flipped on its head, where the secondary is no longer the weakest link, and they're competing maybe to be the strongest unit on the team. So guys like Cam Oliver, Jonathan Baldwin, who have really developed and grown into capable defenders in the secondary at cornerback and safety. And they put it on film. They're willing to fly and play together as a team. And you mentioned some of the new additions from Pac-12 or Power 5 schools that have come in and helped in that regard. The defensive back group is one that I think grew the most. And a lot of that has to do with the system now that's being implemented and the style of recruiting, I think. And that's something that goes overlooked. I think it's one thing to go recruit and get all the 5-star recruits or the 4-star guys and say we've got a talented bunch of guys. But I think in the position UNLV's in and where they're trying to build to, they're not quite there yet. And maybe that's in the future, but I think what they've done is recruit guys on the defensive side of the ball that are not only talented in their own regard, but have a very distinct skill set that matches and marries well with Coach Odom's plan for the defense. And again, we'll see how it evolves. We'll see how it goes. But the defense pitched a shutout for 3 quarters last season against a very explosive team. Although, you'll say an inferior opponent, and most people outside of the locker room would agree with that assessment that UNLV should have been favored in the last game in week 1. But to hold anybody to a shutout for any length of time, especially an explosive offense that averaged 30-plus points last season with a quarterback that threw for 3,000 yards plus and 26 touchdowns, to hold them to 0 points through really 2 3/4 of a game, that was impressive. And I think the defense is taking on the mentality of their head coach at multiple levels. And it's definitely showing with some of the guys who have improved their game and stepped up to the next level.
Caleb, I know UNLV fans have been waiting for the right head coach to get the program winning consistently, but it's been a struggle. It is at a lot of places. Barry Odom is a solid guy. You look at his resume, been an outstanding coach wherever he's been. But as he said in his presser last week, it's a results-oriented business, and he's right. But do you think, and I know this might be an unfair question because it's very early in his tenure, but do you think and hope he might be that guy to get this program on that track winning consistently?
I think so. And I think it has a lot to do, not just with his football talent or his resume as a coach, but I think it has a lot to do with the organizational alignment that has come under the new athletic director, Eric Harper, in his second year, really, as the athletic director. He and Coach Odom are in step. I think they really are on the same page in terms of what the program needs to get over that hump. And I think this community feels it. And if you're looking at things in the past, this is not to knock any of the previous coaching staffs, but he's one of the first coaches. He's the first of the last 3 hires, I should say, that has Division I college head coaching experience. And that goes a long way. And there's a lot of nuance to being a head coach versus a coordinator and things like that. But already I think the community around, and this is a big part of any college football coach's success, is the community, whether or not, people realize it or not. But I think this community has definitely rallied around the things that he's putting down. And I think a lot of that starts with the organizational alignment from the president of the university to the athletic director through the head coach. I think everybody's on the same page in the university, and that feels good. You can feel it. It's palpable around campus and around the football program. And in the community, we do the weekly radio show with the coach, and where he gets his thoughts on the previous week and a look ahead to the next. And the turnout for that, a live audience that we had there this past week, really showed that. And I think he's definitely on the right track, I think, to turning the program to the next step. And that's not to say that the previous coaches didn't contribute. And I think that's actually one of the bigger pieces of it. He's acknowledged that. And the cupboard wasn't empty, so to speak, when he stepped on campus. And things like the Fafita Football Complex, which is one of the top on the West Coast, right? It's competitive with the rest of, the Power 5 conference schools and the facilities that we're able to offer. Obviously, playing at Allegiant Stadium is something that essentially no one has the ability to say that they play in a high-tech professional facility on a weekly basis. I mean, there's obviously advantages when you talk about the big house and those historic college venues, but UNLV is unique in its own right. And one of the things that we're discussing over the offseason was how UNLV has become a sports town, and it's Las Vegas in itself is really become a growing, highly populated sports town. And that's kind of rare for colleges to be nestled in such a place where the market is kind of booming, so to speak, when it comes to the sports world. And UNLV can be the beneficiary if they strike at the right time and if they win at the right time. And Coach Odom understands that. He understands the timing of it, the urgency of it, but at the same time, he knows it's a marathon, not a sprint. And if you build a house the right way, you won't have to tear it down and do it again too often. So I think that's kind of the mentality of Coach Odom and his staff coming in. They have the trust of the higher ups and the organizational part of it to do it their way and to do it the right way. And they're going to take their time with it, but already seeing some benefits. And with that first win, I think everybody feels a little bit better about the direction of the program.
Well, Caleb, this week, of course, UNLV visits the Big House. The first meeting was back in 2015, shortly after your career there ended. It was in Ann Arbor, and it was not a blowout, not by any means, 28-7 Michigan win, but what does this UNLV team need to do to give itself a chance on Saturday?
Well, I think, the number 2 team in the nation is a daunting task for anybody at this point. But I think UNLV has to play a very, very clean game, near perfect as you can get, if not perfect. I think they're a talented bunch that's capable of making plays, but they need to make every opportune play. They need to stay in the fight. I think regardless of what happened, 2 throws the first punch, I think understanding that things happen in the course of the game and being able to respond to those. The longer you stay in the fight, the more chances you have of, getting a decision down to the wire. So that's got to be a goal. Obviously, going into the Big House, and this would be my first trip there. I've never been. And as a fan of college football before becoming an alumni, I must admit this is one of the bucket list venues that I have. So there will be some excitement for me, but that excitement can't be apparent with the players. And I think they have to have that mentality of coming into the Big House. Yes, it's a great venue. It's awesome for its historical context, and the opponent is who they are. But at the end of the day, they have to settle in and play the game of football. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. Has to be the message in the locker room. Otherwise, if you let the nerves of the moment and the excitement of the moment rule your actions, I think most people would agree that that's going to take away from your performance. But honestly, executing and putting the best foot forward and seeing how the chips fly, regardless of the opponent playing their brand of football. And I think that's what they aim to do. And if you listen to Coach Odom, I'm sure that's the message. I haven't really talked to him much this week about it, but I'm sure that's what he's saying. If I know him well enough in these past few days, what he's saying is it's a nameless, faceless opponent, and we have to play our best brand of football. And the closer we are to that, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, it's exactly what he said at the press conference on Monday, a nameless, faceless opponent. But it's going to be a great opportunity for UNLV on Saturday. So a final question before we let you get away, though, Caleb. UNLV has made just 1 bowl appearance since 2000, the last being in 2013. So that was your senior year, right?
That is correct, yeah.
So you were the quarterback. So it's been a while, but for Coach Odom in his first year as head coach, what in reality are fair expectations for this program?
I think that's the beauty of it. One, I'll say that's one of those records as an alumni I don't like to have. The last quarterback to take UNLV to the bowl game. I can't wait for the season where I can say that's no longer true. But I think the expectations in-house are to not have a drop-off. I think the expectations weren't, a rebuild when Coach Odom was hired by Eric Harper. It wasn't to start from scratch and build back to bowl contention. This was a team that was expected to win and be in a bowl game last year. They were a 5-win team, had 4 wins at the 6-game mark of last season, 4-2 at one point, I believe, and couldn't get to a bowl game, couldn't find that last victory the rest of the season. So the expectations last season were bowl game. And I think that's why the need for the coaching change, if you're asking people in-house. But the expectation for this team for this year is to not be worse than that. It's to do what that team was supposed to do last season, which is to achieve bowl eligibility. However that comes, however it manifests itself during the season, that's the expectation. And I think it's a realistic one. When you look at the talent that's still on this roster, the talent that came in, yes, some were lost to the transfer portal, but the additions that were made, I think, filled those gaps suitably, if not improving the team and an overall chemistry level. And I think that's why you hire a guy like Coach Odom, and that's why you trust him to bring in his staff, one of the youngest staffs in all of college football. But they have a plan, and I think their plan is to be successful as quickly as possible. And this year, bowl eligibility is a realistic goal. And I think if you ask any of the players in the locker room, if you ask anyone on the staff, they would agree with that. They don't see a reason why not. And this test against Michigan will definitely give them an indicator of where they are in terms of achieving that goal and where they need to go and what direction they need to be. It's the hardest test in the season, obviously on the schedule, just projecting outward. But when they get into conference play and the games that I think they thought were winnable last year, they think they've got enough in the tank with experience and the new perspective of a new head coach. They think what it takes to be bowl eligible. And I think that is the expectation for this Rebel team.
Here with us today on our visitors edition of the show as we get ready for the big game on Saturday in the Big House has been UNLV color analyst Caleb Herring, former quarterback at UNLV. Caleb, You've been gracious with your time this afternoon. We appreciate hearing from you, and I know you're going to enjoy your trip to the Big House on Saturday. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I'll see you guys out there.
On Quick Hits today, at his Monday presser, Jim said he was very happy with all aspects of the win on Saturday. He was especially thankful the team came away without any injuries. On Thursday's Game Day edition, we'll be joined for the first time this season by the Angel of the Big House, Michigan beat writer Angelique Schengelis from the Detroit News. We'll get her thoughts on the opener and then look ahead to Saturday's UNLV game. Don't forget to like us on Twitter and Facebook, and leave a comment or review wherever you get your podcast. A reminder to tell your family and friends about the show, and join us again on Thursday. That will do it for now. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!